So I'm rolling down the road, and I've got lots of time to just run my mouth. So might as well organize some of my thoughts about the show. So the first thing that was really cool, the venue was nice. The New Braunfels Convention Center, Civic Center, whatever you call it, is really nice. And the folks were really great. Rob Booth, Dana Mathis, who's the president of ipms San Antonio, I hope I got that right, was really nice, and we had some good conversations about shows and judging, and they were just really cool and made me feel really welcome, which was kind of that was good, because I kind of in some ways felt like I was sort of going into enemy territory, given my public position on the ipms philosophy, if you will. And so that was really great. And I met quite a few SMCG guys. Chris McLean, he helped me with my sign up. He wouldn't take my bribe money to make sure I won, but that just means he's got integrity. And I met quite a few other people. I had people coming up to me saying, "Hey, don't you have a YouTube channel?" Or "Hey, I watch your YouTube channel," and that was really cool. I can't deny that's fun. I don't do my YouTube channel so that I get a lot of publicity. I just do what I do. But it's still nice to know that at least a few people watch it and appreciate what I'm all about. So that was cool. The judging experience was intense as fuck. It was physically challenging for me because I was on my little rent-a-scooter. That's not a comfortable seat for 4 hours, and that put an ass whipping on me. It was a little tough for me because I forgot that they were going to have the tables all raised up, and that's absolutely the smart thing to do, because if I were standing on my feet, I wouldn't want to spend all that time hunched over to try and look closely at the models. So, that's the right thing to do, but for me, it meant that they were kind of right about, right below my eye level. And that was great for, scrooching down and looking at all, like alignment and things like that. But it was an ass whipping, just physically for me. And I knew it would be, but I'm tough as a boot, so I got through that part of it. The judging experience itself was really cool because I was put on a team of 3, and the team leader is a guy named Mark Shafter, and a lot of you, some of you guys are going to recognize his name. He is a multi-time nationals winner. If you've ever seen, I showed you his work. I forgot. I did the clip yesterday. I already showed you his work. The guy's amazing. His craftsmanship is unbelievable. He's been building models for about 50 years. That Corsair, he said, took him about 1,000 hours. I may have already said that. He does one about every 2 years. Just amazing work. And he's been a judge at the Nationals a lot. So from that perspective, getting to be on a team with somebody that's got that much experience, that has those kind of build standards, and he's got eagle eyes. Trust me, that dude can see everything. That was really cool. And so I kind of got what I feel like was the prototype ipms judging paradigm experience, and I'm gonna have more thoughts about that. But in a nutshell, it certainly was about construction first. That's the ipms thing, and it certainly was. The San Antonio club is trying to do something a little bit different, which I think is cool. They're kind of going with this, I think Rob called it the total flawlessness thing, and basically what they're trying to do is make each flaw worth the same amount. Like, instead of saying, okay, this guy's wheel is a little bit crooked and this other guy's wheel is a lot crooked, so the guy whose wheel is less crooked is going to do better. That's kind of subjective, and so what they're trying to do is say, okay, both crooked wheels are like worth 1 strike. And the way that they sort of triage the models at the beginning of the judging round is to just go through, inspect them all for construction, different flaws and add up the strikes for each model. And so you've kind of got a list of models, and ideally you start at the top with no strikes and work your way down. And that's what we did. And it's also interesting to note, we were judging the 1/48 scale single engine prop class, which is the most hotly contested. It's the most popular aircraft group. That's all your World War II fighters. And there were about 30 entries, meant 25 to 30, and they had to split them. And they did that in a kind of a funny way. They split it odd number of prop blades and even number of prop blades. So that meant that my little Tamiya Spitfire Mark I went in the odd number, 3 blades obviously, and that meant that I was able to judge on the other side of the table in the even number of prop blades, at least in theory, and I'll say more about that. And also same with Mark, because his Corsair 4 blades, and so he was in theory again not judging in his class, because they were real clear about that. You cannot judge your own work. Well, anyway, so that's how that's how I was assigned a category, and I was grateful for that because I knew that it was going to be the toughest category, and it was. There was a lot of good work in there. We had about 12 in my category, my group, and there were only maybe 4 or 5 that I could sort of instantly eliminate from contention without even really taking a super close look at them. And that was just based honestly, on paint finish and weathering, and that was a pretty easy call for me. So of what was left, we had one that had no construction strikes. We had, I don't know, most of the rest of them, 6 of them maybe, that had only 1 construction strike. And then we had a few that had 2 construction strikes. And that was really about it. And almost all of the construction strikes fell into 2 things. There were 3 or 4 that had a wheel out of whack, one wheel, and a lot of those strikes, probably half of the total strikes were horizontal stabilizers being just a little bit out of alignment. And in some cases, it was easy to see from even a distance, and in other cases, you really had to squint, But that's kind of how it broke down, and so what that meant was that, at least in Mark's mind as our team lead, that the only one that was in contention for the win in the class was the one that had no strikes. I mean, that was, that's the way that system works. And I was in their house, their rules, and I had to put my mind in that. I had to go with that mindset. And so then what it came down to was, for second and third place, we had to look at, okay, you got 2 models or 3 or whatever that all have the same number of strikes. Now what do we do to sort of break the tie? And that's where Mark was like, okay, we get into subjective things, paint finish, and weathering, and more subjective stuff. And so for me, that was relatively easy, but that's where Mark and I don't want to say we came to loggerheads, but it was clear that we looked at it from 2 different points of view. And when you look at his work, you can totally see why, because he has that very sort of clean and tight paint finish, really virtually no weathering. He does a little bit of chipping, but there's no dirt, right? And it was clear, honestly, it was really clear that was his preference. it wasn't that he ever said, okay, this thing is over weathered or that's got too much weathering. It wasn't like that. I could just tell from his comments that, you know, that style was his preference, and obviously it would be. He spent 1,000 hours building something amazing with virtually no weathering. And so he very much liked that number one model that had no strikes, because it also had the same sort of style. And so did several of the others in the category. Whereas I saw some of the others in the category that had, like one in particular, and I know whose they were, and I'm going to try to avoid, you know, saying whose, because I don't want anybody to think there was a bias, because I really tried to be objective. But there was, you know, one in particular where I really thought that it had an excellent paint finish. Multicolor camo scheme, painted on markings, nicely executed and balanced weathering, and kind of filthy, and even some, work to differentiate between not shiny and a little more shiny. It was a sophisticated finish and really tightly done. But Mark, it was clear he didn't like it. He had made, you know, a number of comments to the effect of, well, you know, he's got this like splotchiness, and I was like, dude, you know, and I actually was willing to debate with him. I was like, dude, that he's just showing you the difference in the sheen that is a result of the weathering. And he was like, no, it just looks splotchy to me. and so, you know, we did have some debate about second and third place. And that's kind of what it came down to for second place. There was another Spitfire, and that had only one strike, and it was a wheel that was just slightly out, and it was going up against a Mustang that had a horizontal stabilizer slightly out of whack. I mean, just barely. Like, you really had to be looking to see it. Hopefully I can get this camera back in order here. So yeah, it was really, really close. I felt like that in terms of their flaws, that they were equal. But he clearly preferred the Spitfire that had the very same finish and style as the first place. And in fact, they were both built by the same guy, and built very, very well and very tightly finished. Like, you couldn't say there was anything wrong with them that was objective, right? No paint flaws. But like the Spitfire that Mark wanted for second place, the decals were unweathered. They were just pure stark white, and for me that was a strike, because the Mustang had a very sophisticated weathering scheme, whatever you want to call it. Lots of oil paint rendering, lots of attention to detail weathering, and I wanted to reward that. Damn it! There we go. Shit. Anyway, I wanted to reward that effort because, you know, I'm a weathering guy, and I recognize the work that took, and it was well done. It was well executed. Like the invasion stripes were painted over with olive drab, and that's the kind of stuff that I love. That's taking creative risk to produce authenticity, and I love that. But it was clear again that Mark did not care for that style. So we had a tiebreaker, and Mark said, well, you need to call the head aircraft judge over to break that tie. And I was like, okay, you're the boss. That's what we do. And so the head aircraft judge came over, and he had no problems letting me know that he had like 30 years of judging experience, and that's great, good, lots of practice. And he had no problem picking the models up and looking at them and turning them around, and I was a little freaked out by that, and I could tell Mark was too, but he was good about it. And he said, okay, I see the wheel out on the Spitfire. And that's one thing that I was grateful for in the whole process, is that Mark and I saw all the same physical issues. But then the head judge goes over to the Mustang and he says, yeah, okay, I see the horizontal stabilizer issue. And we didn't tell him any of that. We didn't prime him to see those because that wouldn't have been right. He needed to come into it cold. And so then he said, but I see a wheel that looks a little bit out here. And neither Mark or I had seen that. And I couldn't verify that. But at any rate, that's what broke the tie, and it went to the Spitfire. And, it's a good model. So, it is what it is. I felt like the Mustang should have gotten second place. And then I felt like that since it was kicked out of being the second place tier, that it should have automatically gotten bumped down to the third place. But I didn't realize that until later, and I felt bad about it because then we started debating on the third place tier, and honestly, we sort of forgot about that Mustang being at the second place level. And we ended up picking out one of the third place ones that we had already sort of assigned at that level. And that, honestly, that's one thing I feel really bad about. That was unprofessional. I do feel bad about that because third place in that sort of chain of events really should have gone to the Mustang, in my opinion. But then again, we might have also ended up having to do another tiebreaker because I feel pretty sure that Mark did not want to give, that he would have chosen the one that ended up in the third place spot over the Mustang as well, because he very clearly liked the Mustang. I don't know. That's the way it went, and I respect that that's how it happened under their system and their sort of paradigm. But I really do feel like that had it been up to me, I would have placed them differently. But that's why you have a team of three. And our third judge, he didn't really have much to contribute or much to disagree on. So it kind of honestly came down to Mark and I sort of debating about it. But I definitely feel like that if you had taken that same set of subjects and put them in an SMC scenario with gold, silver, bronze, that it would have gone differently. I really do feel like that. If you just kept it in IPMS but did gold, silver, bronze, would my second place choice have gotten a silver? I guess that depends on sort of the judging, the way that I've talked about it. But I think if you took all of those models over to SMC, that the Mustang would have gotten the gold, as would a couple of the others that I really liked. Because like one of the others that I really liked, the P47 that I was talking about before with the multicolored camo scheme, it had a stabilizer that was slightly out of whack, but it was really, really, really hard to see. It was just a skosh. And I don't think that would have counted against it at a show like SMC. So anyway, I'm looking at the timer on here, and that's like nearly 20 minutes of me babbling about this shit, and I don't know how I'm going to fit all this in, but that's sort of the judging story. Okay, so here's some thoughts about the overall show. I didn't get to see nearly enough of it, and that's a huge regret for me. I went down there thinking that I was going to take a bunch of pictures. I didn't get to do any of that. I did not get to see hardly any of it. I honestly did not hardly go anywhere other than the tables that were in my corner of the room where our group was. And I was able to look at everything on that table pretty closely, which was the 1/48 scale single engine, 1/48 scale multi-engine. I didn't get to look at any of those. 1/48 scale single engine jets and 1/48 scale multi-engine jets. And my Phantom was in that class as well. And that might as well have been the Tomcat class, because there was probably only half a dozen of us in the 1/48 multi-engine jet. And half of them, I think, were Tomcats. And so I can make some observations about all of those in general. And again, so I've said pretty publicly in the past that I feel like that there's a sort of bias at play in ipms against weathering, and this experience at the show and seeing it in person and being a judge not only has not changed that perception for me, but it strengthens it. I'm even more convinced. And again, it's not that I heard any of the, well, that's overweathered, or that wouldn't be that filthy, or no crew chief, whatever. I didn't hear any of that. It was just clear from the way that the judging went and my team that there was a preference at play. That was 100% obvious. And then when I looked at the results, like in my class with the 148 scale multi-engine jets, my Phantom obviously was filthy, but it does not have any construction flaws. But it's in flight, and this is something that I really wondered about, is if because it's not sitting on the ground where you can really look at it and sort of tell if there's anything out of whack, if that put it at a disadvantage. And I don't know, because they didn't have an in-flight category at this show, and so it was the only one that was up off the table. But there was a beautiful A6 Intruder right next to it that had the wings folded, and I actually met the guy who did it. He was super nice. He was one of those guys that came and told me to watch my YouTube channel, and that thing was fucking beautiful. It was, the finish on it was low-vis gray with a lot of really gnarly tonal variety, and the detail on the wing folds was really good. It looked to me like really terrific work. Didn't get a place in the class at all. 2 of the top 3 places went to Tomcats, Tamiya Tomcats, and they were pretty clean. And then over in the 148 scale single engine jets, same thing. The first place winner, beautifully done, actually got talked about as being the best aircraft. It was a blue and white aggressor scheme, and just super, super, super tight. Wonderful craftsmanship, but not a speck of filth or tonal variety on it. And that's that builder's style, and I totally respect that. But again, that's the IPMS style, as I'm going to call it from now on. And right behind it was a Marine Corps Skyhawk that from everything I could tell, was just as tight. Perfect color separations, fantastic detail. In fact, I initially thought that they were built by the same guy, and I found out later that they were not. And it got nothing. Not even a third place out of like 4 in that category. And I was just kind of baffled by that, because it was a much more sophisticated finish. The blue and white and light blue camo is a challenge to paint well, especially when you freehand it. But this guy's finish with the Marine Corps Skyhawk was just a notch above in terms of realism, authenticity, whatever you want to call it, and attention to detail. And I found that overall sort of phenomenon to be true in the 148 scale singles as well. That's, I don't know any other way to say it. Again, I'm not saying that that's bad or good, but that's just the way it was. And so my view on that whole thing is the same as it's ever been, even more so. The other thing, this was a new venue for the show, and I know these guys worked hard on it, and they did a really good job overall. I don't want to take anything away from that, but they kept saying how much better the lighting was at this venue than what they used to use. And I'm like, okay, then you must have been having a model show in a cave before, because honestly, the lighting was terrible, and even Mark was bitching about it. For a convention hall, I guess it was fine, but for inspecting scale models at close range, was not good, and I was really frustrated because I have eagle eyes, but but I was struggling to see the subtleties that I wanted to be able to see in terms of paint finish. And this brings up something that Matt McDougall has mentioned a number of times, and that is that in those conditions, all of the sophisticated weathering techniques that I love, honestly, they get kind of lost. You just can't see them. You can't see in cockpits. You're just as well off to do a closed canopy. Little details like landing gear, brake lines, and stuff like that. They're in the shadows in the bottom, underneath the aircraft, almost impossible to see. So that was really kind of a bummer. I really left feeling dissatisfied at what I saw and was able to see, and it made me feel like, honestly, that I did a shitty job as a judge. And I hate that. The other thing, I took my P40 also. So yeah, you probably figured out by now, I did not collect any iron, no awards whatsoever, and I signed up not only in my 3 classes, but I signed up for every special award that they had. They had, best P40, best F4, best Spitfire. I got nothing. And that's okay. My feelings are not hurt because I knew going in that was probably going to be the case. I predicted that. My P40, didn't get anything. And again, because it was on my stupid, rotisserie display and up off the deck where you couldn't tell if anything was misaligned, maybe again that was at a disadvantage. But that class was a little bit baffling because, Matt was in there with his P40 right next to mine, and it was beautiful. Super, really nice work. His gigantic A6 intruder was right there, and that thing was so impressive. I unfortunately did not get the time to look at it closely, but I could tell from 3 feet away how amazing it was. And it got second in that category. There was probably only 6 or 8 total in the category. But what really kind of baffled me, and again, I don't want to take anything away from the guy who built the winner, because I'm sure he worked hard on it, but it was a 132nd Flyhawk Hurricane. Right next to Matt's P40. By my standards, there's no way that the P40, that Matt's P40 should have gotten nothing while that Hurricane won the class. And not to say anything about mine, Matt got best P40, so they apparently liked his P40 better than my P40. But this Hurricane, honestly, I couldn't understand it. I looked at it briefly, and honestly, I did not feel like it was a contender at all. And so I don't know, that's a little baffling. But that's kind of my overall impression. They had told me that they thought they would be like at 500 or 600 entries, down from like 800 in pre-COVID times. So it's a pretty big show. And I don't know. I asked a couple of people who thought, just from observation, that it was more like 300 entries. I don't know. I'm sure Rob will tell me when we talk again what the final count was, but that's kind of my overall thoughts about that part of it. Overall, a really positive experience. I'm super glad I did it. It was hard, but definitely worthwhile. And now I can say, been there, done that. Got the t-shirt.